Israel Adesanya exacted revenge at UFC 287, knocking out Alex Pereira, and in this video we're going to talk about the knockout anatomy of exactly what happened here. Welcome back everybody, I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you about the medical side of the sports world. And you all really seem to enjoy my UFC medical breakdown, so let's take a look at what happened here tonight, UFC 287. The first part I want to talk about is the initial punch from Adesanya, and the risk of potential facial trauma or fractures to Pereira. Here we can see as Izzy's right comes in, it seems to land kind of on the left outer portion of Pereira's face. As Pereira sort of rotates through here as a result of the impact, we can even see a little bit of this kind of indentation on the side of his face. And that area that we're looking at on the side of his face is an area called the zygomatic process. It's an area of the face that can easily be broken whenever you have some sort of facial trauma or a punch to the face. If we wind this clip up a little bit before, you can see on Pereira's right side how there's this nice kind of round, solid contour to this zygomatic process on the right side of his face. But then after this punch comes in from Izzy and he kind of rotates away, it almost looks like there's a little bit of indentation there. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a sign that there was a fracture, but we obviously are going to be concerned and look out for some potential facial trauma with an injury to that zygomatic bone from that first punch. With our biodigital anatomy tool here, these are the key bones of the face. And this one that I've highlighted here is in particular the zygomatic bone. Nearby to this area, we have the sphenoid bone, which is really thin, and it's actually part of why it's so risky to get punched in the side of the face because of how that bone is so thin in protecting the brain and some key blood vessels we'll talk about in a minute. We then have the temporal bone, which sits basically directly behind the ear. We're going to have the mandible, which is the lower portion of the jaw, and then the maxilla. And so this whole area where everything comes together is this zygomatic process. You can feel it on yourself really clearly. And our body's actually designed in a really smart way because that zygomatic process is there in part to actually protect our eye. You can imagine if that protrusion was not there whenever that punch comes in from Adesanya, all that's going to be left is the orbit. It's going to be the eye socket and potential major trauma to the eye. So having this protrusion, it's almost like in an F1 car where they have that halo structure that goes over the top of the driver. It's designed to be there to kind of protect the orbit, protect the eye, and take some of that blow, take some of that trauma to spare the eyeball. So looking at this again with our triple box, focus on that zygomatic bone, that zygomatic process on the left side of Pereira's face. As Izzy's punch comes in, it's going to land square on that zygomatic process. Thankfully, it does its job. It protects the eye, but could potentially result in facial trauma or facial fracture. And we can even see as Pereira's head kind of loops around here, a little bit of maybe indentation there. Hopefully not, but potentially suggesting a fracture to that area of the face. Next, we can't forget about how the person throwing the punch in this situation could also potentially have some key structures in the hand be injured based on the way that they throw that punch. And we'll talk about that risk to Adesanya, but first, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. This video is sponsored by Raycon, the makers of my favorite pair of earbuds, the Everyday Earbud. Affordable and technology have long been associated with the idea that you get what you pay for and stuff is going to be low quality. But Raycon is proving that saying wrong. I have had a phenomenal experience with these Raycon Everyday Earbuds. First of all, I love the case. It's small, it's convenient, it has USB-C plus wireless charging, and the earbuds themselves have 8 hours of battery life. Second, they're extremely comfortable. They have these really nice soft gel cushion tips with the size to fit anybody's ear. It's nice and low profile, so it fits in your ear and it isn't too obtrusive for things like web calls. And finally, they just sound great. Raycon is on a mission to prove that you don't have to pay an arm and a leg to have great sounding and affordable earbuds. And thanks to Raycon, you're paying half the price for the same, if not better quality sounding earbuds. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/BrianMD to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. I take them to the gym, I use them on all my web calls at work, they go out with me on runs. They're basically my go-to, literally everyday earbud. So thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. You probably heard of a boxer fracture, and a boxer fracture is a break specifically at the neck of the fifth metatarsal. And we see them commonly in boxers because of the way that they throw a punch. Certainly the gloves are going to be there to hopefully protect that from happening with Adesanya here, but that would be one potential risk of throwing a punch where you're striking directly on a hard surface like we just talked about of that zygomatic process. The risk here for Adesanya would be that potential boxer fracture. Looking at our biodigital anatomy tool for the hands, the metacarpals are going to be the bones that basically run through the palm of the hand. So the thumb is going to be the first, second, third, fourth, and the pinky is going to be the fifth metacarpal. A boxer fracture is specifically a fracture at the neck, which is right here on this fifth metacarpal. And the reason why it happens so commonly in boxers is because, particularly if they're right-handed, as you punch across, you tend to be coming across to where your fifth metacarpal, the outside of your hand, is what delivers that load and takes a lot of the blow. You don't punch necessarily straight forward. You punch kind of coming across, and so then most of the majority of the impact is going to go through that fifth metacarpal, potentially leading to a fracture in this specific position called a boxer fracture. Now, the nice thing about boxers fractures is you can really tolerate a lot of angulation in the bone, meaning how angled those two pieces are of the break before you need to do something like a surgery. So even if a fighter does have an injury like this, thankfully, it's not the worst type of fracture that we could see in the hand and something that oftentimes doesn't even require an operation. So triple box again, focusing on that fifth metacarpal. As Izzy throws that right across, he's going to make first contact with the outer portion of his hand, with that fifth metacarpal taking the majority of the load, potentially leading to hand trauma and something specifically called a boxer's fracture. Now, the next interesting part of this is it looked like the first shot wasn't even what put Pereira down. You can see he actually kind of comes back up and looks like he's getting ready to defend himself from this next hit. He has his legs underneath him. He's actually putting his right up, but it's this hit that comes in and lands him more on the side of the head near the ear that ultimately drops him down to the ground. And I want to look back at that anatomy of the facial bones to talk about why a punch to the side of the head like this can also be potentially serious because of some unique anatomy. Punches to the side of the head are in part really dangerous because of how thin the bones are on the side of the head, but also because of a blood vessel that sits beneath the temporal bone called the middle meningeal artery. This is, of course, blood that's coming up from the heart going up to the brain. And this middle meningeal artery sits kind of right next to that bone that protects on the side of your face. If you have a fracture to that bone on the side of the face, you can potentially injure that middle meningeal artery. And that can lead to a specific type of bleeding in the brain called an epidural hematoma. A subdural hematoma is when the veins on the outside of the brain burst, and an epidural hematoma is when one of these arteries or blood vessels, usually this middle meningeal artery. If we look at kind of where the ear is positioned, this is right around that spot where that second punch came in from Adesanya. So this is why we worry about punches to the side of the head. It's similar to why we worry about punches to the back of the skull. At the back of the skull, we worry about injuring the spinal cord. At the side of the head, we worry about injuring these blood vessels that run really close to the bone. If you break the bone, you can injure the blood vessel, and injuring the blood vessel can lead to bleeding in the brain, which can obviously be very serious. You do have all of your middle and inner ear structures here on the side of the head, the vestibular system that helps with your balance and your coordination. And so certainly a shot to the side of the head in this area can also just throw off your balance, throw off your coordination because of how it can alter all that circuitry deeper inside your ear. So that's it for the video, everybody. A nice little review of our facial bones, some facial trauma, some key blood vessels around the side of the head, and something like a boxer's fracture, which unfortunately we can see in somebody who punches a hard surface, like we saw earlier tonight with Adesanya. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and if you guys like these sort of different medical breakdowns, I'll certainly keep them coming. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.